It's that time of year again. It's the Christmas holiday period where I find I have a bit of time on my hands at home and write another piece of entirely superfluous NDI software. So what I've come up with this year is a thing called the NDI BugPlayer, and it's a small utility for playing image sequences. I'm going to illustrate how it works by using the NewTek NDI studio monitor and also my gradient background generator, just so that we've got something to overlay the images onto. So at the moment the studio monitor is just showing the gradient background. If I go to the settings and choose overlay and select the BugPlayer as a source, then by default it just shows the ZEN logo until I load something else into it. So the next step is to load some kind of image sequence. I've got a couple of different sequences that I originally created in Lightwave, and they're PNG files with transparency. So if we select the first one of those, it shows there's more in the sequence. Load the whole lot. You can then, if you want, you can actually test that the sequence works, that you've actually loaded all the files, that it's going to do what you want it to do by using this little preview. But you don't have to leave this running. This has got nothing to do with what's actually displayed on the output. As you can see, the output hasn't actually started receiving that overlay yet. So that's just a sort of confidence check. And then if you turn it on, it will start to overlay on the output. There are several different modes that you can play in, the obvious one being forward, which is the sequence counting up as it was originally designed. If you click it into reverse, then it'll go the other way. So when it was going forward, this scan was in a clockwise direction. Now it's going anti-clockwise. In oscillate mode, it'll go one way and then the other. And there's a second oscillate mode, which is more or less the same thing, but we'll come to that, the difference, a bit later. Essentially, if you go into this one-shot mode, it'll then pause and it will stay static indefinitely until you hit go, and then it'll do one complete cycle. So in the normal oscillate mode, it's doing the forward and then the reverse, and then it stops. If you put it into the second oscillate mode, first time you hit one shot go, it'll go forwards. Next time you hit it, it'll go in reverse. And obviously if you've got it in a mode like forward, then it will just do a forward loop. The final thing you can do is to put a pause in there. So if you put, let's see, we put 3 seconds and take it out of one-shot mode. What should happen once it's completed this cycle is that it'll pause now for the 3 seconds, and then off it goes again, and it'll pause. If we're in the standard oscillate mode, it'll do the entire forward and backwards loop before it pauses. And if we go into the oscillate 2 mode, then it will pause, do the forward run, pause, and then go back in reverse. So that's pretty much it. Obviously you can choose different resolutions, different frame rates. Essentially the overlay itself is 1-to-1, so whatever size your original images are, they'll be overlaid onto the background generator, or at least they'll be overlaid onto the output of the logo BugPlayer in that same pixel size. So this particular sequence that we're looking at the moment was in an image that was 640. If we just go there, you can see this was a 640 by 360. Quite a lot of empty space in there. If we were to overlay that, and at the moment it's going on to a 1280 by 720. So if we stop this, if we change the resolution that we're outputting and make it higher, then obviously it'll be smaller within that larger frame. The idea really is to match the output of the logo player with the size of the image that it's going to be overlaid onto, and equally when you're creating the animation image files, then you would make them at the appropriate size in relation to that overlay, that the kind of final image size that the production is going to be working in. Obviously you can kind of force it to appear bigger if you sort of play around with these sizes, but then it's going to involve scaling, and the fundamental idea is that you avoid scaling. The other thing that I haven't mentioned, important feature, is that you can position the object wherever you want, within reason. You can take the frame of the original overlay, which in this instance is a 640 by 360. If we just put this resolution back to something a bit more sensible, in fact I'll put it back to the 1920, that's probably better. If we go into the logo bug overlay setup, if you click in different places in this preview, then essentially you choose which corner it's going to be overlaid on, and you can then add an offset. So it's a bit close to the bottom there. Let's say you add an offset of 30. That should move it up a bit. Do it a bit more. 50. There we go. What you can't do is put in negative values here. So if I were to move it over to the right hand corner, then because it's in a largish frame, a 640 by 360 frame with quite a lot of black on the right hand side, you can't get rid of that black. But obviously you wouldn't design it like that if you knew that you wanted it to be up against the right hand edge. And I can show you with a different animation. This second one, I cropped the object a lot tighter so that you can get it much closer to the corner. I mean, it's also a bit smaller. It's a 180 by 180. So this is really designed for slightly different usage. But with that one, you would probably want to move it out a little bit. Let's take the pause off, put that back to 0, and it'll just play continuously. So that's the idea of this application. You can feed the output into a variety of things. If you've got a hardware switcher, if you've got something like a vMix or VidBlaster or TriCaster, or I guess Wirecast, OBS, anything that supports NDI input with overlays, then it will take the output from this program. And one of the reasons for using something like this rather than, as an example, vMix, you might say, yes, vMix can load the sequences of images and use them as overlays. But what it tends to do when you load an image is that it scales it full size. So you've then got to try and scale it down and get it back to the size you want it. And it's probably not going to be exact. It's going to be scaled up and scaled down, because there's no simple setting in vMix that says use that original size. So one way around that is to create your whole sequence full frame size and just have your logo in whichever part of the screen you want it to be. The downside of that is that you have to create these large image sizes, and vMix has to load them all into RAM, so you end up using quite a lot of RAM. What's happening in this program is that it's taking small images and loading a sequence of small images, and then on the fly it's adding them into a much bigger frame. So it doesn't need to store that whole sequence of big frames in RAM. For something like this where it's only 120 frames long, maybe that's not so significant. If you make something that's like 500 frames long and they're all full HD, then that starts eating up quite a lot of memory. Plus, of course, with this you can have it running on a different machine. It doesn't have to be on the same machine as you're doing a production on. And for sort of applications like this, which is more of a sort of signage application using the studio monitor, you can have this playing somewhere, and then you can have local copies of the studio monitor onto which you add this particular bit of branding. So that's it. It's really just a little sort of Christmas doodle in NDI land. Really, it's just pulling together different elements out of bits of software that I've already got to present them in a slightly different way. So if you can make use of it, great.